Well, what is the most important day in a person's life? And I know the stock answer would be, well, today. And, you can't argue with that. Jesus said something like that in the Beatitudes. He said, don't worry about tomorrow because today has enough trouble of its own. So Jesus certainly understood that better than anybody. And, I like what Mark Twain said. He said, the two most important days in life are the day that you're born and the day you find out why. You can't argue with that. That's good logic. But there's another really important day. And my family and I found out this week again how important it is. It's the day that people find out that you've died. Because that's the day when they start talking about you post-life. And the words they say about you after that moment might be the most important words ever spoken about you. What kind of legacy do you want to leave? That's the question. What is a legacy? A legacy is just something that's transmitted down the generations. And every one of us has a legacy. Whether you like it or not, you're going to leave a legacy. And if you like a good story with a happy ending when it comes to legacy, you're going to like today's story. Now, we've been talking about this man, Abraham, and his wife, Sarah, for the last several weeks. And really, we've kind of went through something like 68 years with them in their life. And so now here we are in Genesis chapter 23. And let me just pick it up there, verse 1. Sarah lived to be 127 years old. Good news for you ladies. This is the only woman in the Bible that they say her age. So that gives you an excuse. If someone says, hey, how old are you? You say, well, I don't have to tell you that. The Bible doesn't make me do that. So just giving you a little information if you need it. Anyway, let's go on. She lived to be 127. She died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So think about this. There's value given to Sarah that few women on earth will experience. A woman who is mentioned throughout the Bible, and now her death is made for all to hear about. Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. The old man mourned, and he wept. Now, this is the first time that tears are mentioned in the Bible. Doesn't mean that people hadn't cried before then. Obviously, they had. But remember, these people were married for likely more than 100 years. And as you well know, if you know anything about Sarah, she had faults, a lot of them. But at least she had the cooperation with her faults with her husband because he helped her with those. He was her accomplice. And it certainly wasn't a perfect marriage, but he wept. Verse 3, then Abraham rose from the bedside of his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites. He said, I'm a foreigner and a stranger among you. I want you to file that back. We're going to talk about that. Sell me some property for a burial site here so I can bury my dead. The Hittites replied to Abraham, Sir, listen to us. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us would refuse you a tomb for burying your dead. So just a couple bullet points here. He was a mighty man in their eyes. He took a community wherever he went because he had no property of his own. He took a town with him when he moved. Remember, he had his own army, and God promised him the land he was bargaining for. But now Sarah had died. And friends, I want to tell you about some things that we should want to leave when we meet that day. Things that we can learn from these people, things that Sarah and Abraham can show us, things that should come up at the celebration of life that they hold for you, and when they speak your eulogy, and when they talk over the ham sandwiches afterwards, things that we want them to say. And here's a question I'll ask you to begin. Did he or she, did they base their priorities on heaven rather than earth? Hebrews 11:13 calls Abraham an alien who was just passing through. And then watching his wife die, that reminded him and us that this is temporary and that this isn't all there is. And here's a great perspective, that whatever your wealth is like or lack thereof, whatever business you're in, whatever hopes and dreams you're building your life on, you have to stop and ask, are these focused more on earth or on heaven? I've been forced to do some real self-evaluation over the last week. And I have to admit that I find oftentimes I'm putting too much hope in earthly things and not enough consideration to what really matters. And really the question lands on priorities, doesn't it? C.S. Lewis said, if you aim for heaven, you get earth thrown in. If you aim for earth, you get neither. It's about priorities. We get so caught up in earthly stuff and things that really aren't going to last. I mean, the question is, when I'm making decisions here, do I think about tomorrow or do I think about 50 years from now, 100 years, 300 years from now? How much of my priorities, what are really important, how much of that is focused on the long game, not the short one? 1 Thessalonians 4 says, we don't cry and mourn like people who don't have Jesus. We cry like Abraham. He wept, he mourned, but he got up and he said, this is not my home. I was able to be with my mom when she passed away on Tuesday. And it was such a benefit for me to remember when she died, that's not my mom. That's just something she just cast off so she could go to be in the real place that God made for her. It was time for her to move up. I was so happy she could. Now, I got to ask you guys, since it's Father's Day, I'll pick on you a little bit here. How many of you are basing your day-to-day decisions on the things that will be eternal rather than the temporary? And don't get me wrong, hey, I work, I save, I plan, I invest, but what are the priorities? Is my legacy about people, for instance, or is it about possessions? Abraham and Sarah were nomads who lived in tents. They never owned property until the day that Abraham bought a place to bury his wife. And yes, he was wealthy. And yes, he was influential. And yes, he had power more than most men. They saw him as a mighty prince. But if you really want to leave something that's going to last, it's going to be things that far outlast those things. And there's a great analogy here for us who call ourselves Christians and for the church. The world should say about us, the Church of Jesus Christ, they need to see us as people just passing through. We are aliens and foreigners in this place. It's proper for them to say that these are people who have great stature among us, but who are just passing through. And we respect them. And that's how the church should be. Strangers, foreigners. Verse 7, then Abraham rose and bowed down before the people of the land, the Hittites. He said to them, if you are willing to let me bury my dead, then listen to me and intercede with Ephron, the son of Zohar, on my behalf. So he will sell me the cave at Machpelah, which belongs to him and is at the end of his field. Ask him to sell it to me for the full price as a burial site among you. Now you need to know this about Machpelah, this cave, this area. It meant 2 doors. That's significant. It was a cave that had a front door and a back door. That's the way life should be, friend. Your cave should have an in and an out, because we're not staying. We are strangers, we're foreigners, we're aliens. The front door is our birth, the back door is our escape hatch. And I'm going to ask you, do you have an escape hatch? You got to work this out. Ephron the Hittite was sitting among his people and replied to Abraham in the hearing of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of his city. "No, my lord," he said, "listen to me. I give you this field. I give you the cave that it's in. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead." Again, Abraham bowed before the people in the land, and he said to Ephron in their hearing, "Listen to me, if you will. I will pay the price of the field. Accept it from me so I can bury my dead here." Ephron answered Abraham, "Listen to me, my lord. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. But what is that between you and me? Bury your dead." Abraham agreed to Ephron's terms and weighed out for him the price that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weight current among the merchants. Now, just a second. 400 shekels, that's ridiculous. David, hundreds of years later, paid 50 shekels for the site they would build the temple on. So this guy had a little businessman in him too. But for Abraham, hear me now, it was worth it. Why? Because that's his Sarah. That's why. You know, I'm one of the cheapest guys, really. Like when I buy shirts, for instance, you probably know this by looking at me, but when I buy shirts, I'll go to Burlington Coat Factory or someplace like that. I go to the bargain rack, and if it's over $10, I think for a long time about it. That's kind of how I buy clothes. Jackie will come home, she'll have like 2 or 3 beautiful looking shirts. They might cost like $25, $30, $40, whatever. I'll look and say, "How much you pay for that?" I keep them because she's got good taste, but I'm kind of a cheapskate. So, but here's the thing: when it comes to what's important, I think I can get there. You know what I mean? Like my wife, my kids, my church. You know, the kingdom of God. I think I can get there. I can sacrifice for the things that matter. This is the first and only piece of ground that Abraham will ever own, and yet it was his. God promised this land to him. He was promised this land, but he bought a piece of land to bury the dead folks. This is the beginning of the fulfillment of the promise that God would make to him for his heirs, that God would give them this land. And it would be the place that Abraham, Isaac, Rachel, and Leah would be buried. And he bought a crypt with a back door. How many times, guys, and especially us guys, I would say, we get caught up in the front door, you know? Even when you look at homes, like, you know, we spend a lot of money on that approach, you know, the front door. Things that make us look good from the street, you know. And look, again, I'm not saying don't work, don't succeed, don't earn. You're supposed to do that. This is life. But make sure the priority is that you have a back door. I hope that someday when people gather around my departure, the conversation is not just, "Well, you know, the guy can handle money," or, "Well, he was a heck of a preacher," or I hope and pray it's not, "Well, the guy loved the Huskers," for crying out loud. The love is waning, I'm telling you right now. You see, you can amass titles and trophies and lots of stuff. Can you imagine how sad it'd be if people were around your punch bowl after you're gone? And even if you're with the Jesus, and most of you will be, okay? But someone says, "What are you going to remember about Frank?" And someone's kind of awkward silence, and then they say, "Well, man, he sure had a nice house. You see that truck you bought? That thing was sweet. You know what? I'm going to make sure I don't miss that auction because I want to get in on those tools." I mean, here's the thing. It's not about the stuff, and I think we all know that. Raise your hand if you know that. Come on. We all know this stuff, but the stuff knows us too, you know. Hope that we can get to the point where when they're talking about you or me or whoever, it's, "I'm a better person because of him. You know, he made a difference in my life. You know, she did things for me that nobody else would do. She was so considerate, and she made a difference. She taught me so much. He was so patient with us when we didn't deserve it." Things that really matter. Here's another question I have for you. What stories are they going to tell about me? Because Abraham had stories. You know this. His consistent story was he was faithful to God, and so his sphere of influence was immense. And people knew the stories about these people. They knew about Sarah and Abraham coming from idol worshipers in Babylon, and how they were close to God and God spoke to them, and how God had given them promises regarding their offspring that they couldn't have until she was 90 and he was 100. People knew that story. They knew about some of the things that had happened on the journey. They respected him. They called him a prince among men because he had an army. They knew how he did business, and they honored that. How he operated just to deal with getting this burial site shows that. It was a life of consistency and faithfulness, a lifelong process. Because the bottom line is this, and you have to ask yourself this question: what will be the legacy of my marriage? The most insightful day of marriage, I said insightful. The most insightful day of marriage will be the last day. Not the most important day, not the most influential day, but the most insightful day. Verse 17. So Ephron's field in Machpelah near Mamre, both the field and the cave in it, and all the trees within the borders of the field were deeded to Abraham as his property in the presence of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of the city. Afterward, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave in the field at Machpelah in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave in it were deeded to Abraham by the Hittites as a burial site. You know, it's interesting how the last day is honored, but ironically in our culture we put so much emphasis on the first day of marriage. And I get it. I mean, there's a big party. It's ironic though, because the chances of a marriage lasting in our culture is like a coin flip. That's the percentages. There's all kinds of bridal shows, and there's all kinds of magazines and bridal expos and engagement parties and wedding showers. And there's this big day where we get together and dads take out a second mortgage to make that day happen. But think about it. It should be at the end of the marriage where the big party's held. That's where the tears are shed for joy. And married friends, let me ask you, if the day came today where you were standing at the tomb of your precious spouse, is there anything you might regret? Is there anything in your marriage that will ruin a great celebration of life? I want to remind you, these people, they didn't have a great start. I mean, they were idol worshipers. They didn't have a great middle. He pawned her off to the local kings as his sister, and she was in on it. They did some real sketchy stuff with the maidservant, and it was her idea, by the way. That's not a great middle. But they had a great finish, a great ending. And I don't know how your marriage started or even what it's like today. And I know that most marriages go through rough patches. And I think you've come to see that you don't judge a marriage by how it starts or even by the middle of it. I've been to several 40 or 50-year anniversary celebrations where the oldest kid there was born 5 months before the wedding. I've been to some where the couple split up somewhere along the line and now we're having cake in honor of them. I've been to some where the dude was a heavy drinker for 30 or 40 years and he got sober and they had 30 more years that were fantastic. I've celebrated with many couples who at one time experienced infidelity, but somehow, by the grace of God and a lot of forgiveness, they found themselves together for many more years. I've been to some where they didn't get around to God till their kids had all grown up, and now all their kids know the Lord, and so do they. Is there anything in your marriage that you need to deal with because you don't want to regret the day? I was thinking about my marriage this week a little bit. I think I have a great marriage. But let me tell you what I mean by that. It's the hardest thing we do. I mean, are you kidding me? Do you know how many times that we have been so angry we wanted to throw things? None of your business. Do you know how many times the thought might have crossed one or both of our minds? I had enough of this. A couple. Have you ever been madder? Have you ever been more frustrated, more hurt, more zinged than from your spouse? Or you to her or him? I mean, truthfully, why is this? Because there's no one we love more. And there's no one that is more worth it to do life with than your spouse. More worth it. Dads, you got kids at home? I know you want to spend more time playing golf or fishing or whatever you do. I know you want to spend more money on gear. I know you'd like to have more time for yourself. But right now you can't, and here's why. Because your legacy is not going to come with your lower handicap or your trophy fish or dead deer hanging over your dead carcass someday. That's not your legacy. Be honest. The bottom line is that much of being a husband or a dad or a wife or a mom is coming to grips with this thought. It is not about what I do. It's about what will count. Well, you don't understand where we came from. Well, you're right. But let me remind you, they came from idol worshipers. Well, you don't understand what he did to me. Well, I don't know what he did to you, but he slept with her employee. Her employee had a kid with him, and it was her idea, Sarah's. I mean, that's a lot. Well, you don't understand. We can't have kids. I want to have kids. Well, neither could they. But they hung in there. It was a story with a bad start, a hard middle, and a couple who said, God, what will you do with us? You know, we can't choose how many days we have left, but we can choose what we do with today. And that's what this is all about. Because there are tears worth shedding, and there's hope for you. Now, we're going to commune in just a moment. By the way we're going to do that is, some of you already done this, but we have communion stations around the place, and you can just go there and grab your supplies while the song is being sung after the prayer. But as we're moving into this time, I'm going to ask you a couple of reflective questions, and I think they'll help you to sort out how this moment should work. Here's the first question. Will I do what God wants me to do? There's nothing greater that we should want to leave our spouse, our kids, our grandkids, that gives them a legacy shot to have their own back door and meet us there. That's the most important thing you'll do in life. Don't waste the shot. Here's a second question, because it goes with the first one. Will I be a godly person for my family? Not just for myself, not just for God, but for my family. Because the only two great decisions in life I'll ever make is, will I follow God? And will I have a godly marriage? Now, I know some of you are not going to get married. But you can still be a godly person. But you know what's really hard to be? An ungodly marriage and godly. That's really hard. It's almost impossible. Abraham figured that out. Where are your priorities? That's really what this is all about. I know that you're motivated. If we've learned nothing over the last 3 or 4 months, it's that this life is goofy. It is crazy. But you know what's real? God. And you know what ties us to God? Faith. That's real. These people figured it out. He bought a gravesite. It had 2 doors. Make sure you do too. Lord, we come to you in this time of communion. We come to you to celebrate a Jesus who walked into the front door of this world in full view of all humanity. He brought you to us. He died on that cross to give us a escape trap, a way out of here. We would be fools not to accept that gift. Lord, thank you for Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Thank you for this time when we can celebrate his life and love. It's in his name we pray. Amen. Well, as you go on with your day, I hope you have a beautiful Father's Day. Work, plan, live, succeed, grow your enterprise, but do so knowing the trajectory of this, knowing that where the trajectory leads. And you want to have a happy ending. You want to make sure your cave has a escape route. Make sure that doesn't get missed in all this. We're going to sing a little bit more, and then we'll conclude the service, so hang out. And once it's done, we hope you'll stick around if you're comfortable doing so, and just make this a good day to be together. God bless you.